I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect to be believed. I ran over a woman and her mother in California in 1996 and left them in the road. I'm an old man now. My lungs feel like paper bags. My hands are mottled with sunspots, and my life has been packed tight with ordinary things I arranged like furniture to hide what's always been in the middle of the room. I am telling this now because there is more behind me than ahead, because the nights are longer, and because whatever heat my guilt used to throw off has faded to a cold stone I carry in my coat pocket. If you hear impatience in my voice, it's not anger, just the deep fatigue of holding this weight for almost 30 years. This isn't a plea for absolution. It's a race against the final decay of my own conscience. The horror of what I did sits like an old piece of furniture you no longer notice until you stub your toe on it in the dark. My greatest fear isn't judgment or whatever comes after I die. It's the thought that this guilt, this last connection to the lives I destroyed, could wear down completely. I'm afraid of the quiet that will follow, a final, unforgivable numbness where I forget the weight of their names. So I offer this now, not as a way to clear my soul, but as a record, a testament. I need to say what happened, to give it shape and sound before the man who remembers it is gone forever. I owe them that much. I owe them the truth, raw and unvarnished, of the man who took everything from them and then drove home to a life he did not deserve. My name is Michael Delaney, but back then, everyone just called me Mike. I was born inland, but I spent my 20s and 30s in Orange County, where the weather stayed calibrated to the same warm dial, where the wages were decent, and where the nights in the mid-90s churned with a particular kind of bright, sloppy American freedom. We had pagers tucked into our belts, CD books snapped shut in the glove box, and the radio shuffling No Doubt Sublime and Tupac as if nothing bad could last longer than a song. The air in the bars smelled of limes and cigarettes because you could still smoke indoors in most places. We drove home with the windows down to clear our heads, to chase away the fog that made our eyes bright and our judgment thin. It was late summer, 1996. August. The year is a bone in my throat. If you lived there then, you remember the heat had a hard edge that season, and the LA news hardly ever quieted. Wildfires, freeway car chases, yet somehow our lives rolled along like a track on repeat. I was 31, with a decent job in distribution at a warehouse in Santa Ana, a rusty blue '88 Toyota pickup with a cracked dash, and a 2-bedroom apartment with a sagging couch. I also had a girlfriend who deserved better, Hannah Morales. Hannah was the kind of woman who made you want to be a better man, even if you had no idea how to start. She had a laugh that could cut through the noise of any crowded room, and a way of looking at you that felt like a promise. I made her promises all the time back then, real things, eventually. Marriage, a small house in Garden Grove, a dog that wouldn't stop stealing socks. She believed me, and the weight of her belief was something I carried carelessly, like loose change in my pocket. I loved her, but I was a man who loved the idea of tomorrow more than the reality of today. I was always going to be better, always going to start fresh, always going to deserve her, eventually. My life was built on a foundation of good enough. The job was good enough. The truck was good enough. I told myself, a good enough guy. I worked hard, paid my rent on time, and was friendly to my neighbors. I was the kind of man who could look himself in the mirror and see a decent person looking back, because I had learned to ignore the fine print. I was an expert at overlooking the small compromises, the little lies I told myself, the corners I cut. I didn't know it then, but I was building a life where a single, terrible decision wouldn't feel like a break in character, but a continuation of a long, slow decline. I was already on a downward slope. I just hadn't picked up speed yet. That night in August, I finally started to run. We all have a version of ourselves we look back on, a person we barely recognize. Have you ever made a promise you knew, deep down, you couldn't keep? Let me know in the comments. And if you're already hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe for more confessions from the grave. The night that matters started in Costa Mesa. It was a Friday, and the guys from the warehouse had gotten paid. We wrapped the last pallets, shoved the final loads onto the dock, and someone said, "Sharkies." We all knew what that meant. Fish tacos, pitchers of beer, and the loud, crowded kind of dark that makes you feel less alone. I told myself I'd only stay for an hour, a promise as thin as the cheap napkins on the bar. To be honest, I had already been drinking before I walked in, a couple of tall cans out by the loading bay as the sun slipped down, music from someone's car stereo skipping on a burned CD. Inside, the place was a crush of bodies and heat. Surf videos played on silent TVs, and a neon sign buzzed over the bar. We slid onto stools. The bartender, a guy with a backward cap, knew my friend Rick by name, which meant we never waited long. At first it was easy. Beer tastes like permission when you're young. The first pitcher ran out, then the second. Someone bought shots because a woman at the next table was celebrating her birthday, and she looked me in the eyes when she raised her glass. Tequila is a straight lie told quickly. It says, "You are still fine." It says, "The night is still yours." It says, "You can go home later." Around 9:30, my pager went off. The screen glowed. 143, then 911. "I love you, emergency." It was Hannah. She wanted me to pick her up from her sister's place in Santa Ana. I walked outside to the payphone by the parking lot, the handset slick with old sugar, and fed it quarters. When she heard my voice, the relief came first, then a soft, familiar reprimand. "Don't be stupid, Mike," she said, which was her way of saying she loved me. "Keep it under the limit, I promised." Then I went back inside, grabbed my hat, and told the guys I was taking off. Rick tried to make it my moral duty to stay for one last drink. I almost did, but something in the air shifted. Maybe a draft when the door opened, a woman's laugh that reminded me of Hannah's. I said no, backed away, and felt a little righteous about it. That feeling evaporated the moment I dug for my keys. The world had that extra brightness it gets when alcohol thickens the blood. I got into the truck anyway. I remember how the cracked vinyl seat stuck to the backs of my thighs. I turned the ignition, the dashboard lights came on, green and clean, and I told myself I was okay. This is how people like me do it. 100 small assurances, as easy as breathing. Driving at night in Orange County then was a blur of strip malls and palm trees. I took surface streets, all the red lights lining up like beads on a cord. Windows down, the air warm. The radio played KROQ, a DJ threading between songs that all felt like they were about wanting more than you should ever have. I was holding the wheel at 10 and 2, just like they teach you in driver's ed, because performance is a kind of faith. I don't remember the exact cross street. I've avoided mapping it, even now, as if the coordinates might finish a sentence I've never been able to end. It was a 2-lane road through a residential area with a wide shoulder where people parked. There were no street lamps between the blocks, just a warm dark that felt like an extension of daytime. I remember a 7-Eleven sign in the distance, its green light like a beacon. I saw them too late. A woman and an older woman, I learned later they were mother and daughter, stepped out from the right side, from under the trees where the shadows pooled. The younger one had dark hair in a low ponytail, a white sweater tied around her shoulders. The older one had a short, cautious stride. When people talk about time slowing down, they aren't being poetic. It is a defense. It's your mind flattening everything into a sequence you can understand. There's the thud of the brake pedal under my foot, the scree of the tires losing their grip on the road, the wheel jerking in my hands, a flash of their faces, surprise more than fear, and then contact, a dull slam, and a second one quick after. The sound was something I have never been able to forgive for continuing to exist in my head, like metal dropped down a well. The truck seemed to want to buck me forward through the windshield. I stopped, for a second, for 5 seconds. I don't know. The engine idled, the radio still on, a commercial for some electronics store we thought would outlast everything. The air smelled of hot rubber and something sweet and terrible. I saw a white shoe in my headlights, a small purse on the asphalt. The older woman lay twisted toward the curb. The younger one was face down, closer to the center line. A car behind me laid on its horn, then swerved around, tires scrubbing the asphalt, and sped off into the night. I tell myself I stopped because that is the anchor I've always used when this memory comes for me. I stopped. I looked. I put the truck in park. I even put my hand on the door handle. I say this to myself like beads on a rosary. The only honest part is the stopping. The rest is a haze of moral panic, dread, and the sudden elastic thought that if I could just back away, if I could just reverse the tape a few seconds, I could be the version of myself I had been a minute before. You think there's a single moment you become a coward, but it's a mosaic. The bar tab, the pager buzzing and ignored, the choice to get behind the wheel, the empty promise to Hannah, the image in the mirror of a man who knows better and doesn't care. Each piece was laid down long before this night. The final piece was my hand leaving the door handle, my foot moving from the brake, and my fingers closing around the shifter. I left. That is the rotten center of the fruit. I slid the shifter to drive like it was an act of mercy and rolled forward. The truck coughed on broken glass and then found the road again. I didn't floor it. I didn't peel out. I drove slow at first, as if I were obeying a law no one had written, then faster. In the rearview mirror, the white sweater was an animal collapsed in the road. I took the first right, then another, cutting through a neighborhood with the same stucco houses we all grew up in. I hit a stop sign and didn't stop. The alcohol was gone. I was as sober as I have ever been in my life, my mind clear with the cold, sharp certainty of what I had just done. When I pulled into my apartment's lot, the truck's engine pinged with heat. A neighbor on the second-floor walkway was smoking a cigarette and gave me a nod, just like he did every other night. It was a simple, human gesture that felt like a judgment from another universe. Inside my apartment, the silence was deafening. In the bathroom, I washed glass dust from the hairs on my arm and watched the glitter go down the drain. My knuckles had shallow cuts. My shirt smelled of beer and something metallic. I brushed my teeth twice, leaving the water running because the sound made it possible to breathe. When I looked in the mirror, My face had become someone else's. The man looking back was a stranger, his eyes wide with a secret he would have to keep forever. Hannah called again. I let it ring. When it stopped, the machine picked up, and her voice filled the small kitchen. "Mike, I'm getting a ride with Letty. You okay?" Her concern was a physical blow. I could have picked up the phone. I could have told her the truth then, and I didn't. I could have called 911. I didn't. I sat in the recliner, pressing my finger and thumb to the inner corners of my eyes, as if I could squeeze the last 5 minutes to death. Somewhere outside, sirens began. They were distant at first, then closer, and then they passed, their wail fading to the south. They weren't for me. They were for the women I left behind, and for a life I had just abandoned in the middle of the road. I think I slept for 20 minutes. I think I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, the sun came in ruthless. I walked to the truck with a coffee mug in my hand, my hat pulled low. The right headlight was blown, a low, slumped crater in the grill, and the hood was bowed slightly. There were streaks of something pale on the bumper, a smear the color of the inside of your cheek. The windshield had a starburst crack about shoulder high. I kept the mug in my hand like a prop and drove straight to a self-serve car wash on Bristol. I dropped $5 in quarters into the slot and blasted the front end until everything ran clean. I sprayed the wheel wells. I sprayed the undercarriage. At some point, my hand started to shake. A guy with a red Camaro in the next bay asked if I wanted his leftover soap. I just nodded, as if I were still someone who could nod and accept a simple kindness. That afternoon, I called in sick to work. The news ran a brief that night. A mother and daughter hit near Fair and Sunflower. The daughter, 24, pronounced dead on scene. The mother, 52, transported and died at the hospital early the next morning. Names withheld. Police requesting tips. The anchor read the lines with the same quiet professionalism he used for every tragedy. The next day, they announced their names: Renee and Dolores Alvarado. They had been visiting a friend with a new baby, walking to the 7-Eleven to get diapers and Gatorade. The detail about the diapers, that small domestic act of care, was a knife in my gut. The core of this story is a single, terrible decision that led to so many others. What do you think is the most unforgivable part of this confession so far? The drunk driving or the act of leaving them to die in the road? Share your thoughts. Your engagement helps this channel grow, so don't forget to subscribe. If you want to understand how I wasn't caught, you need to understand what it was like then. There were no cameras strung like beads across every intersection. The police were working with what they could touch: paint chips, glass fragments, skid marks. They collected fragments of headlight plastic and scraped paint from the curb. They could compare layers of paint, a primer coat, a base coat, to narrow down possible makes and models. But in 1996, the databases were thin. Even narrowing it down to 10 models isn't an arrest. It's just a direction to drive in. The skid marks told a partial story. They could estimate my speed, but that number is only as good as the road surface and the weight of the vehicle. My old Toyota didn't have an event data recorder, a black box, to say how fast I was going or when I braked. There was no digital footprint. The police did what they could. They checked body shops. They visited the little garages where men like me went on Saturdays to bargain for used parts and pay in cash. The detective assigned left cards at places where a man with a truck like mine might have asked to fix a crumpled hood on the quiet. But night makes witnesses unreliable. Some said the truck was dark, blue or black. Some said gray. Another said it was a small car. Fear makes people forget the details they cling to in the morning. 2 weeks later, I replaced the headlight myself. I bought the part from a junkyard in Santa Ana and did the work at night in my apartment's carport using a single clamp light. It isn't that I was clever, I was just afraid. My hands remembered how to use wrenches from high school auto shop. A neighbor's kid watched from the walkway and asked if I was fixing a toy. I said yes. I buffed the hood with compound until the bowing looked like nothing but a weird reflection. When I threw the old, shattered headlight away, I did it in a dumpster 3 miles from my home, behind a strip of failing stores. I was just a man trying to erase a single moment, not realizing it was already burned into me forever. The guilt started immediately, like a flame dropped in dry grass. I couldn't hold eye contact with anyone for more than a second. I couldn't listen to certain songs without thinking they were mocking me. California Love came on the radio while I was pumping gas, and I had to sit down on the curb because my legs felt like string. When I slept, I heard the second thud over and over. The mother. Because the mind is built to torment the man who fled. Hannah and I made it another 3 months, which was a miracle of small talk and avoidance. She said I was closed off, and she was right. She said I'd been drinking less, and she was accidentally right about that too. I became obsessed with control. My desk at work was arranged with military precision. My clothes were folded to a perfect edge. When we made love, it felt like penance, like I was trying to assemble a new version of myself, molecule by molecule. Then one night, she mentioned the future, kids, that house in Garden Grove, and I snapped. Not with anger, but with a kind of grief that scared us both. We ended it like adults, which is to say, I cried first in the bathroom, and then blamed the tears on a movie we'd watched weeks before. You might expect the guilt to either grow or shrink. What it does instead is change shape. In the early years, it was an acute, physical thing. I vomited in a parking lot after seeing a woman in a white sweater. I followed a police car for 3 miles just to see if it would pull me over, begging the world to deliver a punishment I couldn't give myself. But over time, my mind began to build defenses. I developed a script of rationalizations that played whenever I needed it to. It was dark. I braked. They were in the road. I was young. I didn't mean it. I started to compartmentalize my life. There was the Mike who went to work, coached his nephew's little league team, and helped his sister move. Then there was the other man, the one who lived in a locked room in my head. The guilt, which started as a sharp pain over a specific action, I did a bad thing, slowly metastasized into something deeper, a chronic shame that infected my entire being. It became, I am a bad person. This shame was a quieter, more patient poison. It allowed me to function, to build a life that looked normal from the outside. I bought a little house in 2001 with the kind of pride a man feels when he thinks he has paid for it with his own hands, instead of with someone else's blood. I quit drinking for stretches, sometimes for a year at a time, because I thought sobriety might make me a different man. But the shame was always there, waiting. Living with a secret like this is a prison of the mind. It isolates and eats away at you. If this story is making you think, please share it with someone who appreciates deep, unflinching storytelling. sometime in the late 2000s, with the rise of the internet, my torment found a new ritual. I started looking up the Alvarados. It was easy to find them. I found a Facebook memorial group with photos. Dolores, younger, in an apron dusted with flour. Renee in a cap and gown, smiling at a future she would never have. I read messages from cousins and friends. Thinking of you still, lighting a candle tonight. Their remembrance didn't heal me. It made my guilt more efficient. I began to tell myself that my suffering honored them. It was a disgusting thought, but it was the truth. I made my pain into a monument to avoid the labor of confessing. I was turning their memory into a part of my own private hell, another way to make their tragedy about me. The man in the locked room was becoming the only person I truly knew. In case you're the kind who needs the details to believe, here is what I remember, as if I were reciting an inventory for a report that was never filed. It was a Friday night in August 1996, around 10 o'clock. The road was near Fair and Sunflower in Orange County. I had been drinking beer and tequila. I was driving a blue 1988 Toyota pickup. My right headlight shattered on impact. There were two impacts, close together. I stopped, and then I left. The next morning I cleaned the truck. 2 weeks later, I replaced the headlight myself. Their names were Dolores and Renee Alvarado. They were 52 and 24. They were walking to a 7-Eleven. I did not come forward. I can hear you asking what you're supposed to feel. I don't know. Anger is earned. Pity is not. If you need to hate me, I have pre-hated myself for you so thoroughly that your hatred will fit into spaces I've already carved out. This confession doesn't zero out any ledger. It is not justice. Justice is not something I can give. For the Alvarado family, the word unsolved has been a second loss, a wound that was never allowed to properly scar over. This is not closure. It is simply an admission, a naming of the man behind the wheel. I live quieter now. I go to bed early. Some mornings I carry a lawn chair into the backyard and sit, letting the sun warm my knees. A stray cat rests under the lemon tree. The neighbor's kid, the one I lied to about the headlight, is a man with a kid of his own now. He waves when he sees me, like nothing is wrong. The world keeps its terrible and merciful balance. The guilt has thinned with the years. What used to be an electric current is now a quiet hum. I am ashamed that it faded, that I learned to live with it. But there is remorse, low and steady. There is the memory of a white sweater in the headlights, a purse on the asphalt, and a sound that never stops falling through me. I lived a whole life afterward that I did not deserve. And for whatever it's worth, I remember their names. This is Michael Delaney's confession. What is the ultimate lesson here? Leave your final thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening to the Coffin Confessor. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next secret that was meant for the grave.